Welcome everybody to Office Hours with Dylan Hutchison, where we highlight the people of cybersecurity and the channel. I'm joined by Eddie Phillips. Eddie, how's it going today?
It is going phenomenal. Absolutely
Good, good.
phenomenal.
I will say it's pretty cold here. We just got hammered with snow that we did not anticipate. I'm not
Oh,
thrilled
wow.
about it. I woke up this morning looking at flights to Florida, just out of spite.
Right? Right. So we have a partner in Florida. So I'm desperately trying to get a trip down there because we just got hit by some pretty nasty weather too. So yeah, I'm ready to head south.
Listen, it's all in the spirit of MDF. You got to do the partner events. You just got to go see them.
Right? Right. Just because I
So
happen to choose the winter months to go see them.
yeah, I have a colleague of mine that he somehow always travels to the southern half of the United States during the winter. He lives up in Buffalo, New York. Tim, I'm talking about you. Where his wife will give him grief, like you're always in Florida or the Carolinas during the winter, and then
Isn't that funny, huh?
in the summer you're up here in the Northeast. So yeah, I always like to give him crap for that. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, Eddie, thank you very much for jumping on. Want to first start with an intro of yourself. So, for those that don't know you, I want to hear your journey. Going from network tech to bullfighter to MSP owner to now joining us on the dark side of the vendor world. Just tell me your story.
Wow. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. For sure. I started, I've been in the IT and cybersecurity industry for, it's going to give away my age here, but almost 30 years. God, man, it's been forever. And I started like a lot of people that eventually owned MSPs. I've started on the enterprise. I worked for a small company called EDS. Maybe you've heard of it. World's largest IT outsourcer.
Oh yeah.
And then sometime around 2008, I got this need. I felt compelled to have a more intimate relationship with the people I was helping. I wanted to be able to look them in the eye. I wanted to be able to speak with them and be have evidence to what I was contributing to people and businesses and that sort of thing. So I thought it would be a great idea to start a business.
Oh yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I ended up doing that. So maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. So to back up, actually, so when I started my business is actually when I stopped bullfighting. Okay, so I got to address that elephant in the room.
Yeah, we have to talk about that for a minute.
Okay, very good. So let's step back. When I started, or near around the time I started my IT career, I worked for Microsoft and then Texas Instruments. I left there. I moved back to Canada. My wife's Canadian. I'm actually originally from Texas. And my family is very much into rodeo. My dad was a rodeo stock contractor, supplied the bulls and the calves and the horses and that sort of thing. And the rest of my family, I have a brother that ropes. I've got another brother that rode broncs, bucking horses.
Oh yeah.
And so, my wife is very into horses, and so we started to go to these rodeos. And one day I was watching the rodeo bullfighter. And for those who aren't familiar with what a rodeo bullfighter is versus a Spanish bullfighter, definitely not a Spanish bullfighter scenario, but a definite rodeo bullfighter. So essentially a rodeo clown, except I didn't do the jokes. I didn't. I only came out when the bull riders came out. It was my job to make sure that the bull riders lived to see another day, right? So if the bull was coming after him, it was my job to distract them. So it was interesting. I got knocked out twice. I dislocated my thumb and my ankle, broke some ribs, split my chin open when I caught a horn under here. It was a good time. It was a good time. Yeah.
Man. But
But
nothing compared to the injuries you face when, installing networks and stuff like that, right?
oh man, I would take that. I'll take that. I'm getting run over by a bull any day. Than I'm facing those kind of challenges. But so I did that for about 12 years. It was my moonlighting job when I was a network analyst and security architect. And then when I decided to start my own business was when I hung up my cleats, decided that it was not very easy to describe broken bones and black eyes going to new clients. So I decided it was time to pick a path, and that's the path I picked. And then after that, so for another 14 years, I ran two different MSPs, was involved in a MSSP startup, and then my life changed completely. I was running my MSP. I had two business partners, and in 2022, it kind of came down to two different visions. One of the partners had a vision of staying small, perfecting the process that we were doing, and never really going beyond our borders. And I had bigger visions. I wanted to do
Yeah.
something a lot bigger. I wanted to go national or international if we could. And eventually, we just realized that they say a double-minded person, right, can't really get anything done. Well, a double-visioned company doesn't go anywhere. And so it got to the point around May of 2022 where I actually thought I was going to be buying out my other partner. And then, things shook out. I won't go into the details, but eventually it was decided that, or I decided I was the one that was going to leave. And so I went from owning an MSP, thinking I was going to own all of an MSP or almost all of an MSP, to being suddenly unemployed. The good news is I had mentioned to a good friend of mine, Matt Lee, which I'm sure you've heard of Matt Lee, that I was in the middle of selling my MSP, and he ended up mentioning to Malwarebytes that I was going to be available, and they were looking for somebody to be the face of the channel. Right? They wanted somebody who could speak to MSP. So I literally signed the paperwork to sell my MSP, and my phone rings, and it's Malwarebytes saying, "Hey, we've got this position. We need somebody who can go and speak and talk to MSPs and help them understand it, understand what we're trying to do, what we're trying to contribute to the channel." And I had some very frank and straightforward questions about where they were going, about how they did business, about where, before I could put my name behind it, before I could stand up in front on a stage for them and say, "Hey, look, Malwarebytes is doing, what it needs to do for the channel." I had to be confident in it. And I was straight up with them. There's no way I can get excited or passionate about it if I don't believe in what they're doing. And so they
Right.
satisfied my questions, and they've been satisfying, the direction I've wanted to go for the last, well, I guess it's been almost just over a year and a half. I've been there now. And that's how I ended up on the dark side or the vendor side. You're right. Yeah.
That's awesome. So when all else fails, we have Matt Lee to blame. And then,
Oh,
the
that's
great
my
team at
default.
Malwarebytes.
Actually, that's my
Yep.
default. Yeah.
Yep. I think that's a lot of us. I think that's a lot of us. You're not alone there. No, that's awesome. And you've got a really unique mindset then when you're going and, working with your partners on a day-to-day basis, helping them with not only their strategy for working with Malwarebytes, but their business holistically, because you were in their shoes, which is, I would say it's getting increasingly more popular, but still fairly unique in the space where you come from
Yeah.
the MSP space, and not only the MSP space, but you just mentioned, had the idea of starting your own MSSP. So you've got the security lens, the security mindset. So how do you think, it's received from your MSP partners, or how do you think it changes your approach, or your view on being a vendor in the space coming from that background?
Well, first off, shout out to Malwarebytes, specifically, Brian Thomas, our senior vice president, and Brian Kane, uh, for allowing me to be a bit agnostic when it comes to working with MSPs. They give me full reign to talk sales, to talk security. It doesn't have to be endpoint, it's almost never Malwarebytes. I mean, obviously, I work for them if the conversation comes up or if it goes that direction. That's what we're going to talk about. But I rarely present product. I always have lean more towards strategy and helping MSPs from a holistic method, not never just from one angle. So as far as having that difference, being able to connect with MSPs, I mean, it's such an interesting it is an interesting place to be when you're working for a vendor and having the opportunity to work with and meet with and network with MSP owners. It's a completely different experience, and I'm assuming that most vendors have, right?
Yeah. No, and I can tell you firsthand, never coming from an MSP, there are certain problems that I've uncovered when working with my MSP partners where I'm like, man, I truly don't have that experience, and I haven't experienced that firsthand, those kind of problems. So you being able to go in and say, hey, I know exactly what you're dealing with. I know exactly what you're going through. Here's how I solved these problems, years back when I was at my MSP. It's got to be not only comforting for them, but also instills, a level of confidence for them. Like, hey, I'm moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it does. And if you can allow yourself, like I allow myself to be really vulnerable when it comes to speaking to MSPs, and talking about the challenges. And there's a story I've told a few times about one of our biggest clients getting hit by ransomware back in 2014. And sometimes there's been a time or two where I've almost gotten emotional because it was a big deal for us, and how how it impacted us and how we changed our securities. And MSPs they want to be able to relate, and they want to hear that kind of stuff because then they know they're not alone, right? Like any MSP, I should say almost every MSP feels like they're playing catch up when it comes to security. And when I share those types of experiences and we talk about that kind of thing, and when I can pull that information out of them and have them become just as vulnerable, that's when we really start making progress.
Agreed. It shows them that, their problems are not necessarily unique to what's going on in their little bubble. And oftentimes, whether it's an MSP that operates in their one little zip code, or whether it's an MSP that operates nationally, internationally, they're dealing with customers of all shapes and sizes that have very similar problems. But a lot of times, and there's MSPs out there that will share their stories of, hey, I went through a ransomware incident or business email compromise. My clients went through these scenarios. They'll share their stories, but they don't necessarily understand the impact unless they go through it firsthand, or if they've got that trusted resource and advisor talking them through, hey, this is how it happened to me, and this is why you should be taking this more seriously.
Yeah, 100%. You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
So to backtrack a little bit, I want to talk about the channel, I guess, progression that you've experienced coming from the MSP side to the vendor side. Do you think that's changed your viewpoint on what the channel is more broadly? When you were your own MSP, did you believe you were on your own little island? But now, as you're on the vendor side, getting more involved with the communities, talk to me about how it's changed your view on the channel.
I have to tell you a story, and you can edit this out after if it's too long, but I have to share the story.
Nope,
it is so funny.
We're keeping it.
So let's rewind about a year and 9 months ago, and I suddenly get this email from my largest client that they are approached directly by our hardware vendor, and I will try not to say the name of it. And, so they approached directly by, and this is a big client for us. This was a 250 user client that we had, by far our biggest client. Anyway, and so when I found out that this hardware vendor that we were a partner with approached our client directly, needless to say, I was a little bit perturbed. And I tried to hunt down the person who had contacted them. I contacted our account manager, and I wasn't getting very far. And I actually happened to have a connection for this vendor I think he was the VP of Western Canadian sales or whatever. Yeah. Anyways, I reached out to him directly on LinkedIn. I got a hold of him, and I'll be honest, Dylan, it probably wasn't my proudest moment, but I lit him up because I was pretty upset about it, right? I mean,
absolutely, as you should be.
Well, of course, and he apologized profusely, and I'm a pretty easygoing guy, but I think I was pretty worked up at the time, and I don't think I let him off the hook too easily, but he managed to placate me, and so we wrapped that up, and so fast forward about 3 months, and I'm working for Malwarebytes, and I was helping my team. We were putting together some cadences to send out some emails, and so here I go, of course I'm new to, I think we're using SalesLoft. Anyway, so I was putting it together, and I had set something out, and suddenly I got a very nasty email from one of our partners saying that I had emailed one of his clients with one of our promotional items, putting myself in the exact same position of that vendor who had done that to me like 3 months ago. So I ate crow. It happens. Yep. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't trying to go after one of our partners' clients, and I apologize. I smoothed everything over, but I definitely ate a big crow. It definitely gave me a different viewpoint from the vendor side on how stuff happens. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is all on how you handle that, though. You mentioned that your hardware vendor, hey, we apologize profusely. And then same thing with you. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And you probably shared the war story that it happened to you at your MSP. I dealt with the same thing. I've got partners that have dealt with that. But again, it's all on how you handle it as a vendor. If there are conflicts that happen with your partners, which there inevitably will be. We always say that partnerships are like marriage. Nobody's always right. It's never 50-50. It's all about how you communicate and how you work past those problems. Because if you were to just shut down and say, hey, not my problem. If the customer wants to come talk to me, they'll talk to me. That's the wrong way to handle that. We talk about channel conflict all the time with our partners. and those programming items that go into it. At the end of the day, these are built relationships and
Right.
ultimately friendships
Exactly.
that we hold for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, you're exactly
So
right.
again, it goes with how you handle it. And there are certain vendors out there, we won't name shame, that don't handle it correctly. And we've
Yeah.
all heard the stories from our partners. And if people want to use the comment section as a vent session or therapy room, then you're more than welcome. But yeah, it happens, right?
For sure it does. But it's funny that, I mean, that's a great rule to live by in life in general. It's not what happened, it's how you handle it. I mean, that'll serve you everywhere from relationships to business to clients to staff to what have you. It'll definitely, yeah, it's definitely an approach. It's definitely a lifestyle to approach any kind of interaction like that.
Yeah. So one thing I want to ask about coming now to the vendor side, tell me about your favorite thing about working in the channel on this side. And then maybe if you've got great stories and, maybe if you want to highlight somebody that you worked with in your MSP life, talk to me about some of those good stories of the channel on both ends.
The biggest shock, and maybe not exactly where we're going with this question, but I have to share this. So I think maybe the biggest shock that I had going from an MSP to the vendor side, and that I don't think a lot of vendors think about, is the fact that I only had to know one product. Whereas on the MSP side, we had a dozen or more products that we had to be
Absolutely.
on top of, understand the security, understand the functionality, understand the patching and the changes and the upgrades and on. So I think from a personal perspective, it was unique to say, okay, I now only have to know one product. Now I have to know it very, very, very well, but I only have to know one product.
Yep.
Outside of that, so outside of just my personal experience of making that shift, I would say, oh man, I have so much fun building those relationships and realizing, and I mentioned this earlier about when I talk to MSPs and when I began to hear their horror stories or their experiences, it was a little bit more enlightening for me that, the challenges that we face that everyone is facing. I just wasn't a terrible MSP owner, that everyone was seeing this, right? And I always felt like I was, like behind the eight ball and trying to catch up. It was very refreshing and enlightening for me to see that that I wasn't the only one. And so on that, I've been able to build those relationships. And I have to say that is, I could talk to MSPs all day long. That is so much fun. Like whenever we go to an event, well, I just can't wait to dig in and to talk about where they're going and their experiences and give any kind of advice I can. That's definitely what thrills me in being on this side of the aisle.
Yeah. So when you were at your MSP, though, were you involved in any peer groups or did you know of any out there in the space prior to coming to the vendor side?
We weren't, and I think that was probably a downfall for us. I think we considered it. We were at one point. My MSP was a ConnectWise partner, and I know that they had some peer groups, and I think we were working towards that. But I would probably reflect back maybe on the conflict within my MSP on the double vision, and so I think that hindered us a little bit. But I highly recommend it if there's MSPs out there that are watching this and you're considering a peer group, man, what an opportunity to fast track your knowledge and just to get ahead.
Agreed. One of the big, common misconceptions with joining those peer groups is a lot of people will say like, "Oh, I don't want to share what's in my technology stack, or I don't want to share, my trade secrets." That
Yeah,
doesn't exist.
yeah,
We're all here, again,
that's right.
solving the same problems you just talked about. Like, hey, I've actually talked to MSPs that were having the same problems I was years ago. It's being able to have the collaborative effort, and nobody's going to encroach on the business as long as you've got the proper relationships with whether it's those in your areas, those internationally that you're working with, to help you solve those problems. Because again, your team, whether
Yeah.
you're a one-man band MSP all the way to you've got a team of 50 technicians or more, you're going to need somebody to lean on and rely on that's maybe doing something differently than you.
Oh, yeah, 100%. There is so much wisdom. Like one thing I did do is spend a lot of time on the MSP subreddit. We did gain a lot of wisdom in there. I have to say that I'm very, very impressed. Compared to some of the other subreddits, it's very educational. You get
It is.
it's a very community-based interaction. Like everybody's willing to help each other out. But yeah, you're exactly right.
I'm a big fan of r-MSP. I scroll through it time and time again because I did not come from the MSP side. I've been in security my entire career. I've never come from the infrastructure and hardware side, so I've learned a lot. Hearing how other people have, maybe broken and then maybe fixed or implemented different technologies. It's taught me a lot on what different hardwares or what technologies are right for different kinds of clients.
Yes.
And again, with it being a world that I didn't come from, I've learned a lot, not only from the partners that I work with, but these anonymous members on our MSP. So I agree with you completely. If you're looking for resources and maybe you're not ready to take the formal step into a peer group or working with people on a regular basis, maybe you don't have the time right now. Highly recommend you check out r-MSP and those other resources. Maybe jump into the MSP Geek Discord. There's a lot of things you don't have to be incredibly active. They talk about a lot of really great topics, people working through solutions. And this would not be in office hours if I didn't plug the Tech Degenerates. If you're an MSP looking for a great community of people, highly recommend joining that. Just, hit up anybody that'll scream from the rooftops about the Tech Degenerates. So with that in mind, one thing I do want to ask you about is not just on the vendor side, but going back to your MSP days, like you said, you've got 12, 15, 20 different products you have to work with. I want to hear some of the common mistakes that you see different channel professionals make in the space, and then how you think they could or should change that behavior moving forward.
So from the vendor perspective, you mean?
Yes, on the vendor side, how are those channel account managers, different channel programs? Talk to me about mistakes you saw as an MSP, and then maybe ones you've been exposed to now that you're on the vendor side, and how you'd like to change those, or how you'd advise to change those.
Wow, yeah. So I got lots.
Very big question.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think first off, something that a lot of vendors forget is that even though, so for example, when I came to Malwarebytes, it was having to know one product, and I think a lot of vendors forget how heavy the lift is for a lot of MSPs when it comes to products. And to make matters worse, a MSP can't take the sales process that the vendor used to sell to them, take it, pivot, and use that same sales process for their client. Like, it just doesn't work. I mean, it's an entirely different language. It's an entirely different approach. There has to be a relationship. You have to show ROI. You have to talk about risk. Whereas a vendor has the advantage that the MSP already hopefully understands the space, understands the technology, understands where they're trying to go with this product, and they're looking for the features. The client doesn't give a crap about the features, right? They just want something that reduces their risk, speaks to ROI, and improves their business. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is that, and I like to see, in fact, I love to see the transition that vendors are going through. We are not by far the only vendor that is looking to add value to the channel, right? There are an absolute ton of other vendors out there that are, doing podcasts, and they're doing webinars, and they're investing or they're injecting knowledge and education into the MSP space, even if it doesn't directly benefit them. I feel like the next evolution of this is for maybe vendors to focus more on the how, right? I know that it can be overwhelming for an MSP that is dealing with, growth. They're dealing with hiring and HR and clients and projects and tickets and customer service, and then not to mention their stack and all the changes and all the things I just mentioned about managing a huge stack. And then there's security. And then they go into LinkedIn and they see people like me and a bunch of others out there start to talk about security and NIST and CIS controls, and it can be severely overwhelming. So I don't want to see us fall into the I think we're running into the danger of having a disconnect between, hey, you need to do CIS controls without doing the how, just as an example, or you need to have X technology or X security without doing, like, how does an MSP implement this? How do they get started? How do they communicate and sell this to their client? And I feel that we're in the danger of that right now, because you can be, again, easily you can click into LinkedIn or whatever other resources, even some of the communities that we talked about, and when they begin to go into the deep end, a lot of MSPs are going to back off because they just don't know how to get started.
Yeah. I was just talking to Ken Patterson about this the other day, where there's so many vendors out there that are like, man, why are my partners not selling more of my product? Why are they not, building this as part of their standard tech stack? The reality is you didn't teach them how to, because you're selling them a product,
Yes.
but ultimately they're selling their clients a solution. And Ken, I'm going to completely rip you off. Like when you go to the doctor and your doctor hands you a handful of pills and say, hey, take these, you don't question them and
Nope.
go, hey, I don't need this because I don't want it. I've got, vitamin B12 at home. Because your doctor prescribes you the solution catered to what they've identified as your problems. MSPs are doing the exact same thing. Us as vendors have to realize we have to figure out who are we for, what are the characteristics of a good customer, more importantly, what are the characteristics of a bad customer for our product, solution, what have you. And I completely agree. I think the expectations are a little skewed on the vendor side where they're saying, no, I'm a fit for every single one of your customers. If you're an MSP, push me everywhere.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's different for, the operational and efficiency products such as, the RMM, PSAs, and the like. But those sell-through security products, EDR, MDR, XDR, acronym of the week, vulnerability management, identity access, like those different tools, we're not a fit for everybody. And that's what we have to realize as the vendor and be okay with that realization.
Yeah. Yeah. You really nailed it there. And the other thing that we're seeing around, the movement forward, and I talked about that fear of that disconnect. But you brought up a super point when I love that doctor analogy. Like when you go to the doctor, you're not questioning that, and I feel like that will be the next. Like I mean, we're looking in the next maybe 6 months to a year, perhaps more, where some sort of regulation, whether hopefully it's self-regulation, but at some point or another, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. I mean, I know it's happened for government agencies, but even for small and medium businesses, I'm gonna expect that in some degree or another, that regulation is going to, start mandating that certain levels be in place. In fact, I mean, we're in a way we're already seeing it when it comes to insurance companies, and
When insurance, yeah.
as embarrassed that I am that the insurance companies have to drive our industry forward, that's exactly what's happening, right? I mean, so I was just talking to my business partner, my previous business partner, and he was telling me that it's so much tougher now to get insurance as an MSP. Like they're not even
Oh,
they're
yeah.
limiting the amount that they're insuring it for across the board. The requirements are going up, and while that's really really good, it's it does provide a platform on the positive side. It does provide a platform for the MSP to go to their clients and say, hey, look, if we're going to be insured, if you're going to get insured, this is what we have to have in place. Like, there's nothing like, hey, you're not going to get insured as a sales pitch, I suppose.
Yeah, I see that all the time. And again, like you, I'm sad that insurance is the way, and it's not to use, the scare tactic or FUD.
No.
It's the harsh reality of things.
Yeah.
Insurance is no longer going to cover you unless you have these basic controls in place, and those basic controls are continuously evolving. They're currently expanding. It used to be the front and back side, basically buying car insurance, and now you fill out a
Yeah.
full-blown risk assessment to get insurance, which I'm personally a fan of. But again, security guy
Yeah.
from the beginning. Um, so, but I'm there with you. It's getting increasingly difficult for not only MSPs but also their SMB clients alike.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. We before I left my MSP, we were helping one of our clients renew their insurance. And what used to happen was they would get the form and they would have a list of items like EDR, MDR, the list goes on and on. And they would just check off. We'd sit down with them and check off what they had and didn't have. And normally, based on what they did or didn't have, their premiums would go up and down.
Right.
And then on the last round, right before I left, if you had said no to anything, you were uninsurable. So it's all
Yep.
or nothing. And so it was great because it's funny because we were trying to convince them like of the ROI on and the risk management on some of these items, and basically they said, well, I guess we have to now, and away we went, right? So yeah, it's a different world. It's a different world for sure.
Yeah. It's completely different, and I'm very curious to see how it continues to shift
Hmm.
um, with the expectations and the requirements from those insurers. How are MSPs going to handle that? How are they going to position that with their clients? From the one man band that may not be the most mature MSP all the way to those national multinationals.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with that in mind, before we wrap up here, really want to highlight you. So roll out the carpet for you, as Sean Evans on Hot One says. Just want to have you plug yourself and tell everybody what you got going on.
Oh man. So again, been with Malwarebytes for just over a year and a half now. I've worn a lot of different hats. I'm fairly versatile when it comes to helping, us integrate with, some of our channel partners, our distribution partners. But I'm, honestly, if you're, looking for me to plug myself, I love events. I haven't published my speaking calendar yet. You can find it at rep4.com if you're looking for a direct plug. You can see some samples of what I do. But yeah, looking forward to getting out there, connecting with more MSPs, and yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. And for people that want to get in contact with you, whether it's to learn about Malwarebytes or just connect with you, talk about bullfighting, how do they do it?
Definitely LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I love to do post as much as time allows. But yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely reach out on LinkedIn. I am not a LinkedIn snob. I will connect with anybody you want to chat about business, about sales, about security, about growth. Yeah, hit me up for sure.
Awesome. I'll be sure to link that down below for everybody, make it
Perfect.
easy. And Eddie, I really do appreciate you coming on. I've got to say, you've got a very, very interesting background, and I can't wait to meet you further in the future.
That'd be great, Dylan. If let's do something in person. We'll definitely go for dinner, find some drinks. That'd be phenomenal.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
All right, take care.